Gate agents tears up black boys' first-class tickets, freeze when they reveal their dad owns the airline. The unmistakable sound of ripping paper echoed through the busy terminal. Conversations halted. Heads turned. 14-year-old Marcus Johnson felt his cheeks burn as the gate agent held the torn fragments of his first-class ticket between perfectly manicured fingernails, her eyes cold and suspicious. "I'm sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all, "but these tickets appear to be irregular." She glanced dismissively at Marcus and his 12-year-old brother Devin, their matching Air Elite blazers suddenly feeling too tight across their shoulders. "Perhaps you boys are at the wrong gate." Devin's eyes welled with tears as Marcus fought to keep his voice steady. "Ma'am, there must be some mistake. Our father—" "Your father," she interrupted with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes, "would want you to follow proper procedures. Security." She lifted her hand to summon the nearby officer. That's when the terminal doors swished open, and a tall figure in a crisp charcoal suit strode in, commanding the attention of everyone in the vicinity. The security officer froze mid-step. The gate agent's smile faltered, and the two boys exchanged a knowing look that would change everything. No one in that terminal could have guessed what would happen next, or how this moment would transform not just an airline, but the lives of everyone involved. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next. This journey is just beginning, and trust me, you won't want to miss where it leads. The story of the Johnson family and Air Elite Airways didn't begin on that fateful day in Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. To understand what really happened, and why it matters, we need to go back 3 decades, to when Raymond Johnson was just a baggage handler with dreams bigger than the jets he loaded day after day. Raymond Johnson pulled his threadbare coat tighter against the biting November wind as he trudged across the tarmac of Newark Airport. The year was 1988, and at 23 years old, he was already 5 years into what his father called honest work, loading and unloading luggage for Transcontinental Airways. The pay barely covered his tiny apartment in Newark's less desirable East Side, but Raymond wasn't focused on his current circumstances. His mind was always in the clouds, quite literally. "Johnson, stop daydreaming and get these bags loaded. Flight 372 is already behind schedule," barked Supervisor Harkins, a barrel-chested man whose perpetual scowl had intimidated generations of baggage handlers. "Yes, sir," Raymond responded automatically, lifting a heavy Samsonite with practiced ease. But even as his body went through the familiar motions, his mind continued spinning with calculations, route efficiencies, and the business plan he worked on every night after his shift. What no one knew, not Harkins, not his colleagues, not even his family, was that Raymond Johnson had been taking night classes in business administration for 3 years. He had also saved every penny possible, building a modest investment portfolio that was growing slowly but steadily. He wasn't just a baggage handler, he was a man with a vision. As Raymond loaded the last bag, he glanced up at the cockpit where Captain William Thorndike was running through his pre-flight checklist. Thorndike, a Vietnam veteran with salt and pepper hair and the respect of everyone at the airline, had taken an unusual interest in the young baggage handler who asked surprisingly insightful questions about airline operations. "Johnson," Thorndike called down from his window, "still interested in how this bird really flies?" Raymond's face lit up. "Always, Captain." "Then you're coming with us to Chicago. I cleared it with management, educational purposes." Thorndike winked. "Consider it your first unofficial flight lesson." Raymond couldn't believe his ears. He had mentioned his dream of understanding every aspect of airline operations to the captain just once, during a chance conversation in the airport cafeteria. He hadn't expected Thorndike to remember, let alone act on it. "But sir, my shift." "Already handled. Now get on board before I change my mind. And Johnson, bring that notebook I always see you scribbling in. You'll want to take notes." That flight changed everything. Seated in the cockpit jump seat, Raymond absorbed every detail. How Thorndike managed communications with air traffic control, how the first officer monitored the complex instrument panels, how small adjustments to their approach saved fuel without compromising safety. But most importantly, Raymond observed how Thorndike treated everyone, from flight attendants to passengers, with the same respect and dignity. People forget that an airline isn't just planes and schedules, Thorndyke told him as they cruised at 33,000 feet. It's a promise to take people home to their families, to get them to business meetings that could change their lives, to carry them to weddings and funerals and moments that matter. That's why every detail counts, every person matters. Remember that, Johnson, if you ever find yourself in charge. I will, sir, Raymond promised, not knowing how prophetic those words would prove to be. When they landed in Chicago, Raymond helped the ground crew unload bags, earning curious looks but also respect for his willingness to work alongside them despite his special status with the captain. As the passengers disembarked, Raymond noticed something that would stick with him for years. A young black family being subtly but unmistakably directed away from the first-class lounge despite their obvious eligibility. The father, dressed in an impeccable suit that screamed success, calmly showed their boarding passes again, his dignity intact even as the gate agent's skepticism remained evident. His two young daughters, perhaps 5 and 7, watched with wide eyes, absorbing a lesson no parent would wish to teach. Raymond felt a familiar knot in his stomach, the same one he felt whenever he mentioned his ambitions and was met with patronizing smiles. He watched as Captain Thorndyke noticed the situation and smoothly intervened, personally escorting the family to the lounge with a respect that transformed the moment. Later, as they prepared for the return flight, Raymond asked Thorndyke about the incident. "Did you see what happened with that family at the lounge?" Thorndyke's expression grew serious. "I did, and it happens more often than anyone admits. Aviation has come a long way, Johnson, but it still has blind spots, still makes assumptions about who belongs where." He adjusted his uniform cap thoughtfully. "That's why this industry needs new blood, new perspectives, people who see problems others don't even recognize." Raymond nodded, something resolving within him. "I understand, sir." "I think you do," Thorndyke replied, giving him an appraising look. "Now, ready to learn about return flight procedures." For the next 3 years, Captain Thorndyke became Raymond's unofficial mentor. The veteran pilot arranged for Raymond to observe operations in various departments: dispatch, maintenance, customer service, all while the young man continued his formal education and his regular baggage handling duties. By 1991, Raymond had earned his business degree, saved enough to make his first serious investment, and gained a comprehensive understanding of airline operations that few executives could match. What he hadn't gained was any significant advancement within transcontinental airways, despite applying for numerous internal positions. "Johnson, you're a hard worker, and we value that right where you are," said Mrs. Kensington from Human Resources, not quite meeting his eyes as she rejected his 5th application for a management trainee position. "Perhaps in a few more years." That evening, Raymond met Captain Thorndyke at their usual spot, a quiet corner table at the Winged Propeller, a bar near Newark Airport where aviation professionals gathered after hours. "They turned me down again," Raymond said, rotating his glass of club soda absently. Thorndyke wasn't surprised. Transcontinental was founded in 1946, Raymond. Some of its thinking is still stuck there. "So what am I supposed to do? Keep loading bags while my ideas collect dust?" The older man studied him for a moment. "What would you do if you were running things, if you had the power to build an airline from scratch?" Raymond had been asked many questions in his life, but never this one, never by someone who seemed to genuinely believe it was possible. The floodgates opened. For the next 2 hours, he outlined his vision: an airline that combined cutting-edge efficiency with exceptional customer service, that treated employees as valuable assets rather than replaceable parts, that recognized diversity as a strength rather than a challenge to be managed. When he finally ran out of steam, Thorndyke was watching him with an odd expression. "What?" Raymond asked, suddenly self-conscious. "I've been in aviation for 30 years, son. I've heard a lot of people talk about what's wrong with airlines and how they'd fix it, but you're the first one who might actually pull it off." Thorndyke reached into his jacket and slid a business card across the table. "Call this man, tell him I sent you." The card belonged to Edward Pembroke, a venture capitalist known for taking chances on unconventional entrepreneurs. 3 weeks later, Raymond Johnson quit his job at Transcontinental Airways. 6 months after that, with Pembroke's backing and Thorndyke's industry connections, he founded Johnson Air, a small regional carrier with just 2 leased aircraft and a staff of 30, many of whom were talented individuals overlooked by larger airlines for reasons that had nothing to do with their capabilities. The early years were brutal. Established carriers used every trick in the book to squeeze the newcomer out, undercutting routes, poaching staff, spreading rumors about the airline's stability. But Raymond had spent years studying the industry's weaknesses, and he'd built his operation specifically to withstand these pressures. Johnson Air offered slightly fewer flights but maintained near-perfect reliability. They couldn't compete on route networks, so they made each flight an exceptional experience. They couldn't afford lavish marketing campaigns, so they relied on word of mouth from satisfied customers. And when competitors tried to starve them of resources, Raymond's deep relationships with ground crews and maintenance teams across multiple airports, friendships forged during his baggage handling days, proved invaluable. By 1997, Johnson Air had expanded to 12 aircraft and was consistently profitable, a remarkable achievement for a startup airline. That year also brought 2 significant changes to Raymond's life. First, he married Catherine Williamson, a brilliant flight operations manager whose statistical models had helped Johnson Air optimize its limited resources. Second, the airline was renamed Air Elite, a change Catherine suggested to better position them as they expanded into more competitive markets. Elite doesn't have to mean exclusive, she argued. It can mean the best possible experience for everyone. That's what we're building, Ray, an airline that treats every passenger like they belong in first class. The rebranding coincided with their first major expansion, funded by a new round of investment that included several high-profile believers in Raymond's vision. Air Elite began flying coast-to-coast routes, competing directly with industry giants that had once dismissed the small regional carrier as irrelevant. In 1998, Marcus Johnson was born, followed by Devon in 2000. Raymond, now a successful CEO, was determined that his sons would understand both privilege and responsibility. From an early age, the boys were taught about the business, brought to the hangars to meet mechanics, introduced to flight attendants and pilots who shared stories of the airline's early struggles. "Your father started by loading these very bags," Catherine would tell them during airport visits, making sure they thanked the ground crew by name. "Never forget that every job matters, every person contributes." As Air Elite grew into a major carrier through the 2000s, Raymond maintained the core principles that had defined the airline from the beginning. He implemented profit sharing for all employees, created pathways for advancement that recognized talent regardless of background, and personally reviewed customer complaints to ensure the airline never lost sight of its commitment to service. By 2012, Air Elite had become an industry success story, with 47 aircraft, routes to major cities across the United States and parts of Canada, and a reputation for both operational excellence and exceptional customer experience. The airline was particularly known for its diverse workforce and management team, a direct result of Raymond's commitment to finding talent in places his competitors overlooked. Which brings us to that fateful day at O'Hare International Airport in 2014, where Marcus and Devon Johnson, aged 16 and 14, were about to experience a painful lesson about the world their father had been navigating all his life. The Johnson brothers had flown dozens of times before, usually accompanied by one or both parents. But this trip was different. For the first time, Marcus and Devon were traveling alone from Chicago to New York, where they would meet their parents for a family vacation after Raymond and Catherine concluded a business meeting. "You're representing Air Elite now," Raymond had told them that morning at the hotel, straightening Marcus's tie with paternal precision. "The airline jackets aren't just for show. They're a reminder that you're part of something bigger than yourselves." "We know, Dad," Marcus had replied, trying not to roll his eyes. At 16, he was in that delicate phase between childhood and adulthood, eager to prove his maturity while still learning what that actually meant. "And remember," Catherine added, giving Devon's shoulder a gentle squeeze, "if you have any problems at all, call us immediately. Don't try to handle everything yourselves." "Mom, we'll be fine," Devon assured her with the confidence of a 12-year-old who had grown up in airports. "It's just a 2-hour flight on our own airline." The boys had spent the morning exploring Chicago with their father's assistant, Sophia Chen, who dropped them at the airport with plenty of time to spare. They checked in without incident, received their boarding passes for the first-class cabin Raymond believed in experiencing the service his airline provided, and made their way through security with the practiced ease of frequent travelers. With over an hour before their flight, they decided to visit the Air Elite Lounge. This is where the trouble began. "Excuse me," said the lounge attendant, a woman in her 50s named Marilyn Winters who had not looked up from her computer. "This lounge is for first-class passengers and elite status members only." "We have first-class tickets," Marcus explained politely, sliding their boarding passes across the counter. Marilyn glanced at the passes, then at the boys, her expression shifting subtly. "And where are your parents?" "They're in New York," Devon explained. "We're meeting them there." "I see," Marilyn's tone cooled noticeably. "And these tickets, how did you boys come by them?" Marcus felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced in upscale stores when security guards followed him a little too closely, or when teachers expressed surprise at his academic achievements. Before he could respond, another lounge employee approached, a younger man with a name tag reading Thomas. "Is there a problem, Marilyn?" he asked, his eyes taking in the situation quickly. "These young men claim to have first-class tickets, unaccompanied." Marilyn's emphasis made her skepticism clear. Thomas looked at the boarding passes, then at the boys' Air Elite blazers, and his demeanor softened. "Those are legitimate boarding passes, Marilyn, and based on their company attire, I'm guessing they're either employee dependents or part of our Young Aviators program." Devon began, but Marcus squeezed his arm, a silent signal they'd developed over years of navigating situations like this. "Thank you, sir," Marcus said to Thomas instead. "We appreciate your help." Thomas smiled apologetically. "Enjoy the lounge, gentlemen. Can I get you anything while you're waiting for your flight?" "We're fine, thank you," Marcus replied, guiding his brother to a quiet corner of the lounge where they could decompress. "Why didn't you tell them who Dad is?" Devon whispered once they were seated. "That lady was being horrible." Marcus sighed, keeping his voice low. "Because Dad always says we should be treated well because of how we behave, not whose sons we are." Devon frowned, absorbing this. "But it's not fair, she just assumed we didn't belong here." "I know," Marcus admitted, "but remember what Dad says." "Be so good they can't ignore you," Devon finished, quoting one of their father's favorite expressions. "Still not fair, though." The boys spent the next 45 minutes in the lounge, quietly reading and observing the business travelers around them. A few people glanced curiously in their direction, but no one bothered them further. When the time came to board, they gathered their belongings and headed to Gate 22, where Flight 453 to New York was preparing for departure. The gate area was crowded with passengers, creating the controlled chaos familiar to any air traveler. The brothers joined the priority boarding line, boarding passes and identification ready as their father had taught them. When they reached the front of the line, they were greeted by gate agent Patricia Simmons, whose customer service smile flickered as she registered the two young black boys in Air Elite blazers. "Good afternoon," Marcus said with practiced courtesy. "We're boarding the flight to New York." Patricia took their boarding passes, her eyebrows rising as she noted the first-class cabin assignment. "And you're traveling alone? No adults accompanying you?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus confirmed. "We're meeting our parents in New York." Patricia looked at their identification, then back at the boarding passes, her lips pursing slightly. "These tickets seem unusual. First class is fully booked on this flight." "The reservation was made weeks ago," Marcus explained, maintaining his composure despite the growing knot in his stomach. "There shouldn't be any issues." Patricia tapped at her computer terminal, frowning. "Well, there seems to be some sort of irregularity. I'll need to verify these." As other passengers began to queue behind them, Marcus felt Devon shifting nervously at his side. This was quickly becoming exactly the kind of scene their parents had cautioned them to avoid. "Perhaps we could step aside while you verify," Marcus suggested, trying to remember how his father handled tense situations. "We don't want to hold up the line." Patricia nodded curtly, motioning them to the side of the desk where another agent, Brad Kennedy, was organizing paperwork. "Brad, can you check these tickets? Something doesn't seem right." Brad glanced at the boarding passes, then at the boys, and a subtle change came over his expression. A hardening, a distancing. "Where did you get these tickets?" "Our parents made the reservation," Devin said, his voice smaller than usual. "We're supposed to be in first class." Brad and Patricia exchanged a look that made Marcus's skin crawl, a look that said, without words, that something wasn't adding up. "Wait here," Brad instructed, taking their boarding passes and ID cards to a back office. Minutes passed, other passengers continued boarding. The brothers stood awkwardly to the side, uncomfortably aware of curious glances from travelers passing by. Marcus checked his watch, 15 minutes until scheduled departure. "Should we call Mom and Dad?" Devin whispered, anxiety evident in his voice. Marcus hesitated. On one hand, this was exactly the kind of situation their parents had told them to call about. On the other hand, he wanted to prove they could handle challenges independently. "Let's give them a few more minutes to sort it out." Brad returned, accompanied by a security officer whose hand rested casually near his holster. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. "We have a problem," Brad announced, holding up their boarding passes. "These appear to be fraudulent. The names don't match any legitimate reservation in our system for first-class passengers." "That's impossible," Marcus protested, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Our father made those reservations personally." "And who exactly is your father?" Patricia asked, her tone making it clear she expected an unconvincing answer. This was the moment, the decision point. Marcus could feel Devin looking to him for guidance, could sense the weight of his father's expectations and his mother's concerns. He straightened his shoulders. "Our father is Raymond Johnson. He's the founder and CEO of Air Elite Airways." The claim hung in the air. Patricia's skeptical expression didn't waver. Brad actually chuckled. "Of course he is," Brad said, his tone dripping with condescension. "And I'm sure you have some way to prove that." "Call him," Marcus suggested, pulling out his phone. "I have his number right here." "That won't be necessary," Patricia interrupted, taking the boarding passes from Brad. "We have procedures for handling situations like this." And that's when she did it, tore the boarding passes in half with a swift, decisive motion that echoed through the gate area. Conversations halted. Heads turned. Marcus felt his cheeks burn as the gate agent held the torn fragments between perfectly manicured fingernails, her eyes cold and suspicious. "I'm sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all, "but these tickets appear to be irregular. Perhaps you boys are at the wrong gate." Devin's eyes welled with tears as Marcus fought to keep his voice steady. "Ma'am, there must be some mistake. Our father—" "Your father," she interrupted with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes, "would want you to follow proper procedures. Security." She lifted her hand to summon the nearby officer. That's when the terminal doors swished open, and a tall figure in a crisp charcoal suit strode in, commanding the attention of everyone in the vicinity. Captain William Thorndyke, now Air Elite's chief of flight operations and Raymond Johnson's most trusted advisor, walked directly toward the commotion, his presence exuding authority. The security officer froze mid-step. The gate agent's smile faltered, and the two boys exchanged a look that would change everything. "Captain Thorndyke," Marcus called out, relief washing over him. Thorndyke, now in his 70s but still imposing with his military bearing and penetrating gaze, assessed the situation in seconds. "Marcus, Devin, is there a problem here?" "They tore up our boarding passes," Devin blurted, pointing at the fragments still in Patricia's hand. "They said they're fake." Thorndyke turned to Patricia, his expression unreadable. "May I see what's left of those passes, please?" Patricia hesitated, then handed over the torn tickets, her confidence visibly wavering. "And you are?" Thorndyke asked, though the name tag on her uniform was clearly visible. "Patricia Simmons, sir, gate supervisor for Air Elite." "I see. And who authorized you to destroy passenger boarding documents, Miss Simmons?" "Sir, these tickets appeared fraudulent. These." Individuals claimed to be first-class passengers and, when questioned, made an outrageous claim about being related to the CEO. "An outrageous claim," Thorndyke repeated slowly, looking from the torn tickets to the boys in their Air Elite blazers. I see. And did it occur to you to verify this claim before destroying company property and humiliating these young men? Patricia's face paled slightly. Sir, we have procedures. Indeed we do, Thorndyke interrupted, and I'm familiar with every one of them, having helped write many of them alongside Raymond Johnson himself. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Ray, Bill Thorndyke here. I'm at gate 22 with Marcus and Devon. There's been an incident with their boarding passes. Yes, they're fine, but I think you should speak with the gate's supervisor. He handed the phone to Patricia, whose hand trembled slightly as she took it. Hello. The gathered crowd couldn't hear Raymond's words, but they could see the blood drain from Patricia's face as she listened. After a moment, she wordlessly passed the phone to Brad, who experienced a similar transformation as he took his turn listening to the CEO. When Brad finally handed the phone back to Thorndyke, the captain spoke briefly, then ended the call. Mr. Johnson will be joining us via video conference momentarily. In the meantime, I suggest we move this discussion somewhere less public. He turned to the security officer. Officer, would you please escort Ms. Simmons and Mr. Kennedy to the gate office? Marcus, Devon, you'll come with me. As the small group moved toward the office, the remaining gate agent, a young woman who had watched the entire scene with growing horror, quickly announced, Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. Flight 453 to New York will begin boarding in approximately 15 minutes. Thank you for your patience. Inside the cramped gate office, Thorndyke positioned himself protectively near the Johnson brothers, while Patricia and Brad stood awkwardly against the far wall. The security officer remained by the door, his expression now carefully neutral. A laptop on the desk chimed with an incoming video call. Thorndyke opened it, and Raymond Johnson's face appeared on the screen, his expression calm but his eyes blazing with the controlled fury those who knew him well had learned to recognize. Is this story keeping you on the edge of your seat? Subscribe now and comment below about where you're watching from. I'd love to know which part of the world this story is reaching, and I promise the next revelations will be worth the wait. Captain Thorndyke, thank you for being there for my sons, Raymond began, his voice measured. Marcus, Devon, are you both all right? We're fine, Dad, Marcus assured him, though his voice betrayed his lingering distress. Good, now, Raymond continued, his gaze shifting to Patricia and Brad. I understand there was some confusion about my son's tickets. Mr. Johnson, sir, Patricia began, her customer service smile snapping back into place. There was a misunderstanding, our system showed. Ms. Simmons, Raymond interrupted quietly, I checked the system personally before this call. It shows exactly what it should. 2 first-class tickets for Marcus and Devon Johnson, booked through my executive account, with all appropriate unaccompanied minor documentation completed and filed. There was no system error. Patricia's smile faltered. Sir, in our defense, these young men didn't immediately identify themselves as what, Miss Simmons? Raymond's question hung in the air, daring her to complete the thought. Brad stepped forward slightly. Sir, we have procedures for verifying passenger identity, especially for premium cabins. We were simply doing our jobs. Your job, Mr. Kennedy, is to verify documentation, not to make assumptions about who belongs where. Raymond leaned closer to the camera. Tell me, do you typically tear up first-class passengers' boarding passes when you have questions about their validity? No, sir, Brad admitted, looking at the floor. I thought not. Raymond's gaze shifted between the 2 gate agents. What happened today reflects a failure on multiple levels, a failure of procedure, of judgment, and of the core values Air Elite was built on. He paused, and in that moment, everyone in the room could see the weight of this incident on his shoulders, not just as a father whose children had been humiliated, but as a leader whose vision for his company had been betrayed. Captain Thorndyke will ensure my sons board their flight with new boarding passes and appropriate apologies, Raymond continued. Ms. Simmons, Mr. Kennedy, you will report to my office in New York tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. We will discuss this incident in detail, including your futures with Air Elite. Yes, sir, they murmured in unison. One more thing, Raymond added. This incident is not to be dismissed as a simple misunderstanding or an isolated occurrence. What happened today has happened to countless passengers who didn't have the ability to call the CEO. That stops now. His expression softened as he looked at his sons. Marcus, Devin, I'll see you in New York. Mom and I love you both. The call ended, leaving the office in tense silence. Thorndyke closed the laptop and turned to the gate agents. I believe you have a flight to board. I suggest you begin by printing new boarding passes for Mr. Johnson's sons and making an announcement that first-class boarding will commence in 5 minutes. As Patricia and Brad hurried to comply, Thorndyke placed a hand on each boy's shoulder. Your father is a remarkable man, he said quietly. I've known him since he was loading bags on the tarmac, and I've never seen him lose sight of who he is or what matters. You boys handled yourselves with the same dignity today. He'll be proud. Minutes later, Marcus and Devin Johnson boarded Flight 453, escorted personally by Captain Thorndyke. As they settled into their first-class seats, they couldn't help but notice how the cabin crew treated them with exaggerated courtesy, word of the incident having spread through airport staff with lightning speed. Do you think Dad will fire them? Devin asked once they were alone, his voice small. Marcus considered the question carefully. I don't know. Dad always says that how you handle mistakes shows more character than avoiding them in the first place. They were awful to us, Marcus. I know, but remember what Dad told us about the early days, how people treated him when he was starting out. He didn't get mad, he built something better. Devin nodded slowly. So what do you think will happen? Marcus looked out the window at the bustling airport, thinking about his father's journey from baggage handler to CEO, about the lessons he'd been taught about privilege and responsibility. I think tomorrow's meeting is going to change a lot more than just two people's jobs. He was right. The following morning in the Air Elite corporate headquarters in downtown Manhattan, Raymond Johnson sat in his office, reviewing the incident report Captain Thorndyke had submitted. The large corner office reflected Raymond's practical nature, comfortable but not ostentatious, with model aircraft representing each type in the Air Elite fleet displayed on shelves alongside family photos. Katherine Johnson entered, closing the door behind her. Unlike many corporate couples who maintained a professional distance at work, the Johnsons had always been partners in every sense. As Air Elite's chief strategy officer, Katherine's analytical mind complemented Raymond's visionary approach. I spoke with the boys at breakfast, she said, taking a seat across from him. They're okay, resilient like their father. Raymond nodded, his expression troubled. They shouldn't have to be resilient in this particular way, Kat, not on my airline of all places. No, they shouldn't, she agreed. But the question is, what are we going to do about it? Raymond gestured to the report. Thorndyke documented everything. It's exactly what we've heard from customer complaints before. Assumptions made, courtesy withheld, procedures applied selectively. He met his wife's gaze. The difference is, this time we have irrefutable proof. And 2 terrified employees who are due in your office in 15 minutes, Katherine added. What's your plan? Raymond stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. I've been asking myself what my younger self would want me to do. The Raymond Johnson who watched that family being turned away from the lounge in Chicago all those years ago. And he'd want me to fix the system, not just punish 2 people who are symptoms of a larger problem. He turned back to his wife. I'm going to use this, Kat, not just to address what happened to our sons, but to finally implement the comprehensive training program you've been advocating for. Katherine's eyes widened. The full cultural awareness and service equity initiative, the board has been resistant for years. The board hasn't had the CEO's children publicly humiliated by his own staff, Raymond replied with grim determination. They'll approve it now. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Raymond's assistant, Sophia Chen, entered. Mr. Johnson, Ms. Simmons, and Mr. Kennedy are here. Thank you, Sophia. Please show them in and hold all calls. Patricia Simmons and Brad Kennedy entered the office, both looking as though they hadn't slept. They were still wearing their Air Elite uniforms, though without the confident posture that usually accompanied them. Please sit down, Raymond said, gesturing to the chairs arranged in front of his desk. Katherine remained standing, moving to position herself beside her husband in a show of unified leadership. Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Johnson, Patricia began, her voice thick with rehearsed contrition. We want to express our deepest apologies for yesterday's incident. It was a terrible misunderstanding. Raymond studied her for a moment. Ms. Simmons, I appreciate your apology, but I'd like to understand what exactly you think was misunderstood. Patricia blinked, thrown off script. Well, sir, we didn't recognize your sons, and... Should you have needed to recognize them? Raymond interrupted. Do all first-class passengers need to be personally known to you before receiving appropriate service? No, sir, of course not, she stammered. Then what was the misunderstanding? Raymond pressed, his tone remaining measured but insistent. Brad Kennedy shifted uncomfortably. Sir, if I may. When two teenagers present first-class tickets without adult supervision, it raises concerns about potential fraud. We were simply exercising caution. Catherine raised an eyebrow. Mr. Kennedy, Air Elite transports approximately 100 unaccompanied minors daily, some in first class. Is it standard procedure to accuse them of fraud? No, ma'am, but my sons are black, Raymond finished for him. And in your experience, black teenagers don't typically belong in first class unless they're with white adults. Isn't that the real misunderstanding? The room fell silent. Patricia looked at her hands. Brad's face flushed. I'm not interested in public apologies or terminations that make headlines but solve nothing, Raymond continued after a moment. What interests me is change, real, meaningful change that ensures no passenger ever experiences what my sons did yesterday. He picked up a folder from his desk and handed copies to both employees. This is our new Cultural Awareness and Service Equity Initiative. Starting next month, every customer-facing employee at Air Elite will undergo this training program. You too will be among the first participants. Patricia leafed through the document, her expression a mixture of relief and confusion. Sir, does this mean we're not being terminated? That depends on you, Raymond replied. If you complete the program and demonstrate genuine understanding and growth, you'll be reassigned, not to customer-facing roles initially, but to positions where you can rebuild trust. If you're unwilling to participate fully, then yes, your employment will be terminated. Brad looked up from the document. Sir, with all due respect, this seems excessive for a single incident. Raymond's expression hardened. Mr. Kennedy, let me be very clear. What happened yesterday was not a single incident. It was merely the first time it happened to someone with the power to demand accountability. He pressed a button on his desk phone. Sophia, please send in Dr. Rivera. A moment later, Dr. Elena Rivera entered the office. In her mid-50s with silver-streaked black hair and an air of quiet authority, she was a respected diversity consultant who had worked with several major corporations. Dr. Rivera will be leading the case initiative, Raymond explained. She'll also be conducting one-on-one sessions with both of you before the group training begins. Dr. Rivera nodded professionally to the gate agents. We'll be working together closely over the coming weeks. My approach isn't about shame or punishment, but about awareness and growth. I believe both of you have the capacity to become better employees and better people through this process. Patricia, who had been growing increasingly pale during the meeting, finally spoke up. Mr. Johnson, I want you to know that I never thought of myself as prejudiced. My own sister is married to a black man. I have biracial nieces. Raymond nodded, his expression softening slightly. Ms. Simmons, some of the most insidious biases exist in people who genuinely believe they're free of them. That's what makes them so difficult to address. He stood, signaling that the meeting was concluding. Dr. Rivera will schedule your first sessions this week. In the meantime, you're both on administrative leave with pay. I suggest you use this time for reflection. After Patricia and Brad had been escorted out by Sophia, Dr. Rivera turned to the Johnsons. That was well handled, Raymond. Most CEOs would have fired them on the spot, either to make an example or to avoid potential bad publicity. Firing them might feel satisfying, Raymond acknowledged, but it wouldn't solve the underlying problem, and Air Elite has never been about quick fixes. Catherine squeezed her husband's hand. The board meeting is in an hour. Are you ready to present the full case initiative? Raymond nodded, his resolve evident. More than ready. What happened to Marcus and Devon was painful, but if it catalyzes real change throughout the airline, some good will come from it. Dr. Rivera gathered her materials. I should prepare for the presentation. The financial projections and implementation timeline are ready whenever you need them. After she left, Catherine turned to Raymond. You know this will be expensive and potentially controversial. Some board members will push back. Let them, Raymond replied with quiet confidence. 26 years ago, I was told I didn't belong in airline management. Yesterday, my sons were told they didn't belong in first class. The specifics change, but the message remains the same. It's time we changed the message. An hour later, in the Air Elite boardroom, Raymond stood before the 12-member board of directors. The presentation on the case initiative had been thorough, outlining not just the training program, but also new hiring practices, customer service protocols, and accountability metrics. Walter Hargrove, the oldest board member and a longtime airline industry executive, was the first to speak when Raymond concluded. Ray, while I sympathize with what happened to your boys, truly, I do. This program seems like an overreaction. The cost alone is substantial, not to mention the operational disruption of pulling staff for training. Several board members nodded in agreement, but before Raymond could respond, an unexpected voice spoke up. With respect, Walter, I disagree, said James Chen, the newest and youngest board member who had made his fortune in tech before investing heavily in Air Elite. What happened to the CEO's sons is just the visible tip of a much larger iceberg. How many similar incidents go unreported because the passengers don't have direct access to leadership? Exactly, added Diane Ockhaffer, another board member who had joined 3 years earlier. And let's be honest about the potential costs of not implementing this program. One viral social media post about discriminatory treatment could do more damage to our brand than this entire initiative costs. The debate continued for nearly an hour, with opinions divided largely along generational lines. Throughout the discussion, Raymond remained calm, addressing concerns with facts rather than emotion, presenting the case initiative not as a reaction to a personal affront, but as a strategic business decision. Finally, it came time to vote. Raymond, as both CEO and chair, spoke one last time before the tallying began. When I founded this airline, I promised to build something different, an airline that valued every passenger, every employee, every perspective. Yesterday, we failed to live up to that promise. Today, we have an opportunity to recommit to it, to make it stronger and more explicit than ever before. The question isn't whether we can afford this initiative. The question is whether we can afford to be the kind of airline where what happened to my sons is accepted as business as usual. The vote was 7-5 in favor of implementing the full case initiative, with funding secured for at least 3 years. As the board members filed out, Captain Thorndyke, who had attended as a non-voting observer in his capacity as Chief of Flight Operations, approached Raymond. Congratulations! That was well fought and well won. Raymond shook his head slightly. It shouldn't have been a fight at all, Bill. Maybe not, the older man agreed, but most meaningful changes are fought for, not given freely. You taught me that, remember? Back when you were trying to convince me to leave Transcontinental and join your crazy startup. Raymond smiled at the memory. You took a hell of a risk on me back then. Best decision I ever made, Thorndyke replied without hesitation. And today's vote, second best decision this airline has made. He glanced at his watch. Speaking of decisions, shouldn't you be heading home? Catherine mentioned something about a family dinner to celebrate the boys' first solo flight. Right, Raymond nodded, gathering his materials. Though after yesterday, I'm not sure celebrate is the right word. On the contrary, Thorndyke countered, I think it's exactly the right word. Your sons handled themselves with extraordinary dignity yesterday, Ray. They're a credit to you and Catherine, and now they've directly contributed to making this airline better. That's worth celebrating. Raymond considered this perspective. You know, you're right. As painful as yesterday was, it's also part of their journey, learning to navigate a world that doesn't always see them clearly, finding their voices in difficult moments. Just like their father did, Thorndyke noted with quiet pride. That evening, the Johnson family gathered around the dining table in their Upper East Side apartment. Catherine had prepared Raymond's mother's jambalaya recipe, a family tradition for significant occasions. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on the day's events but not dwelling on them. When dessert was served, Devon's favorite chocolate cheesecake, Raymond raised his glass of sparkling cider. A toast to Marcus and Devon, who yesterday faced a difficult situation with courage and dignity. And to change, Catherine added, raising her own glass, to making sure fewer people have to face those situations in the future. What exactly is changing, Dad? Marcus asked, curiosity evident in his expression. Besides those two gate agents getting in trouble. Raymond exchanged a glance with Catherine before responding. The board approved the case initiative today. The training program Mom has been developing for years. Every employee will learn about biases they might not even realize they have, about how to provide truly equitable service. Because of what happened to us? Devon asked, wide-eyed. Partly, Raymond acknowledged. Your experience gave us the push we needed to make it happen now, but these changes have been in the works for a long time. Marcus considered this, so something good came from something bad. Often that's how progress works, Catherine explained. It shouldn't require painful incidents to drive change, but historically it often has. Like how Grandpa losing his job led you to start the airline? Devon asked, referring to a family story they'd heard many times. How Raymond's father had been laid off after 30 years at a manufacturing plant, inspiring Raymond's commitment to employee equity. Exactly like that, Raymond agreed, impressed by his younger son's connection. Sometimes the most powerful catalyst for positive change is experiencing firsthand what needs to be fixed. As the family continued their meal, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Devon's upcoming science fair project, Marcus's basketball tournament, plans for their weekend in New York. But the lesson lingered, unspoken but understood. Adversity, while painful, could be transformed into opportunity when approached with integrity and purpose. What none of them could have anticipated was how the events set in motion that week would ripple outward, affecting not just Air Elite, but the entire airline industry in ways both subtle and profound. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Patricia Simmons stood nervously in the Air Elite Training Center auditorium. The large room was filled with gate agents, flight attendants, and customer service representatives from airports across the eastern seaboard, all gathered for the official launch of the CASE initiative's company-wide rollout. Patricia had completed her individual sessions with Dr. Rivera and had been one of 20 employees selected for the pilot program. To her surprise, the experience had been transformative rather than punitive, forcing her to confront unconscious biases she'd never acknowledged even to herself. Now, as she prepared to address her colleagues, many of whom knew about the incident through company gossip, she felt a complex mixture of anxiety and purpose. "You're going to do fine," Brad Kennedy reassured her as they waited backstage. He too had completed the program and emerged with a new perspective that had surprised even him. "Just speak from the heart like we practiced." The house lights dimmed, and Dr. Rivera took the stage to introduce the day's agenda. After outlining the program's objectives, she said, "But before we begin, I'd like to introduce 2 employees whose experiences helped shape this initiative. Please welcome Patricia Simmons and Brad Kennedy." As Patricia walked onto the stage, she could feel curious eyes following her. Taking a deep breath, she stepped to the microphone. "6 months ago, I made a mistake that changed my life," she began, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "I humiliated 2 young passengers based on assumptions I didn't even realize I was making. I judged them not by their boarding passes or their behavior, but by their appearance, specifically their race and age." The auditorium was silent, every person present aware of the incident she was referencing. "I could have lost my job that day, and I would have deserved to," Patricia continued. "Instead, I was given something much harder than termination, the opportunity to confront my own biases, to grow from my mistake, and to help others avoid making similar ones." For the next 10 minutes, Patricia shared her journey through the CASE program, the initial defensiveness, the uncomfortable realizations, the gradual shift in perspective. She spoke about discovering patterns in her customer interactions that she'd never noticed before, about learning to question her instinctive reactions, about developing new habits of thought and behavior. This program isn't about making us feel guilty or walking on eggshells, she concluded. It's about seeing each passenger, each person, clearly, without the filter of assumptions we might not even know we're applying. It's about being better at our jobs by being more conscious of our thoughts and actions. When she finished, there was a moment of silence before the applause began, tentative at first, then growing stronger as Brad joined her on stage for his portion of the presentation. In the back of the auditorium, unnoticed by most attendees, Raymond and Katherine Johnson watched with quiet satisfaction. They hadn't announced their presence, preferring to observe the session without influencing its dynamics. "She's come a long way," Katherine whispered as they slipped out during a transition between speakers. "They both have," Raymond agreed. "Dr. Rivera says they're among the program's most effective advocates precisely because they can speak from personal experience." "And the early feedback from the pilot program?" "Promising. Customer satisfaction scores are up 8% at the test locations. Employee retention has improved, too." Katherine nodded thoughtfully as they walked through the corridor toward the exit. "It's a good start, but the real test will be sustaining momentum once the initial attention fades." "That's why the board approved the 3-year funding," Raymond reminded her. "This isn't a one-time training, it's a fundamental shift in company culture." As they reached the lobby, they were surprised to see Captain Thorndyke waiting for them, engaged in conversation with a tall, distinguished man in an impeccably tailored suit. "Ray, Catherine," Thorndyke called, waving them over. "Look who I found waiting for a meeting with public relations." The man turned, and Raymond immediately recognized Calvin Washington, CEO of Atlantic Airways, one of Air Elite's largest competitors. "Raymond, Catherine," Washington greeted them with a professional warmth that couldn't quite mask his evident curiosity. "Bill was just telling me about your case initiative. Sounds ambitious." Raymond shook the offered hand. "Calvin, I didn't realize Atlantic had an interest in our internal training programs." Washington chuckled, acknowledging the subtle challenge. "Let's just say that what Air Elite does tends to make waves in the industry, especially when it makes headlines." The incident with the Johnson boys had indeed made headlines, though not in the way one might expect. Rather than trying to suppress the story, Air Elite had taken a different approach: transparency. With the family's permission, the airline had issued a statement acknowledging what had happened, accepting responsibility, and outlining the steps being taken to address the underlying issues. The approach had garnered respect from industry observers and customers alike, though competitors had watched warily, concerned about potential new standards being set. "Our PR team mentioned you'd requested a meeting," Catherine noted. "May I ask what about?" Washington glanced around the lobby, then suggested, "Perhaps we could speak somewhere more private." Minutes later, the four of them were seated in a small conference room off the main lobby. Washington didn't waste time once the door closed. "I'll be direct," he began. "Atlantic's board has taken notice of your case initiative and the positive press it's generated. They've asked me to explore whether there might be opportunities for collaboration." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "Collaboration between direct competitors?" "On this specific issue, yes," Washington confirmed. "Bias in customer service isn't unique to Air Elite, though you've been uniquely transparent about addressing it. Our internal metrics suggest similar patterns exist at Atlantic and likely throughout the industry." "And your board is suddenly concerned about this?" Catherine asked, skepticism evident in her tone. Washington smiled thinly. "Let's say they're concerned about being perceived as less progressive than Air Elite, but their motivations don't change the potential benefits of a coordinated approach." Thorndyke, who had been listening silently, spoke up. "What exactly are you proposing, Calvin?" "A joint initiative, an industry-wide commitment to cultural awareness training based on the framework Raymond and Catherine have developed," Washington explained. "Air Elite would license the case materials to Atlantic and potentially other carriers, with appropriate compensation, of course. We'd implement parallel programs, perhaps with some shared resources and data collection." Raymond studied the competitor CEO thoughtfully. "And the benefit to Air Elite would be?" "Besides the licensing revenue?" Washington leaned forward. Scale and impact. What you're trying to accomplish is important, Raymond. We both know that. But one airline, even one as influential as Air Elite, can only change so much. An industry-wide initiative could transform the entire passenger experience. Catherine and Raymond exchanged a glance, their years of partnership allowing for silent communication. Catherine gave a slight nod. "We're interested in discussing this further," Raymond said after a moment, "but with some conditions. First, any collaboration would need to maintain the integrity of the program, no watered-down versions. Second, we'd want transparent data sharing to measure effectiveness. And third, this would need to be a genuine, long-term commitment, not a PR exercise." Washington nodded. "Those terms seem reasonable, though my board will want specifics on the financial arrangements." "Of course," Raymond agreed. "Have your team send over a formal proposal and we'll review it with our board." As they concluded the meeting and Washington departed, Thorndyke turned to the Johnsons with a thoughtful expression. "You know, when you told those gate agents that the incident with your boys wasn't just about them, I don't think any of us imagined it would lead to an industry-wide initiative." Raymond smiled slightly. "That's the thing about doing the right thing, Bill. You never know how far the ripples will spread." Over the next 18 months, those ripples extended beyond anything the Johnsons could have predicted. The collaboration with Atlantic Airways expanded to include 4 other major carriers and numerous regional airlines. The CASE initiative evolved into the Aviation Service Equity Coalition, with Raymond and Catherine frequently speaking at industry conferences about the business case for equitable service. More remarkably, the incident that catalyzed these changes faded from public memory, remembered primarily as the starting point of a significant industry shift rather than a painful personal experience for 2 young men. 3 years after the incident at O'Hare, Marcus Johnson stood in the Air Elite corporate headquarters, staring out the window of his father's office. At 19, he had grown into a thoughtful young man, currently in his sophomore year at Howard University studying business with a focus on organizational psychology. "Nervous?" Devin asked, joining his brother by the window. At 15, Devin had his mother's analytical mind and his father's quiet confidence, though he was considering a future in engineering rather than business. "A little," Marcus admitted. "It's a big responsibility." Today marked a significant moment in Air Elite's evolution. Raymond and Catherine were preparing to announce a new educational initiative, a scholarship and internship program specifically designed to create pathways into aviation for underrepresented communities. The program would be named after Captain William Thorndyke, who had passed away peacefully 6 months earlier. More personally for Marcus, it was the day he would deliver his first official speech as the program's youth ambassador, addressing the gathered media and industry representatives. The door opened and Raymond entered, adjusting his tie. "Almost time, boys. The press is gathered in the conference center." He studied his older son's expression. "Second thoughts, Marcus." Marcus shook his head. "Not about doing it, just want to make sure I get it right. This program matters." Raymond placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You know, I was about your age when Captain Thorndyke first let me into that cockpit, when he first showed me I belonged in aviation despite what everyone else seemed to think." "I remember the story," Marcus nodded. "That's why this scholarship means so much, giving other kids that same moment of belonging." "Exactly," Raymond squeezed his shoulder. "Your speech is excellent, Marcus. Just speak from the heart like we practiced." Devin grinned. "Besides, you can't possibly be more nervous than those gate agents were when they had to face Dad." The brothers laughed, the memory now transformed into a family reference point rather than a painful wound. Patricia Simmons had eventually become one of the CASE program's most effective trainers, while Brad Kennedy had transferred to operations management, where he helped implement more equitable service protocols. "Speaking of which," Raymond said, checking his watch, "Patricia is already downstairs helping coordinate the event. We should head down." As they rode the elevator to the conference level, Catherine joined them, elegant in a tailored navy suit. "Ready for your big moment?" she asked Marcus. "As ready as I'll ever be," he replied. "You'll be wonderful," she assured him. "Just remember why we're doing this, not just for the cameras or the press, but for all the young people who need to know they belong." When the elevator doors opened, they were greeted by the controlled chaos of a major press event. Staff directing attendees, photographers adjusting equipment, reporters checking recording devices. At the entrance to the main conference room, Patricia Simmons was reviewing the seating chart with several assistants. "Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Johnson," she greeted them professionally, though her smile held genuine warmth. "Everything is ready. We have full attendance from the invited press, plus representatives from all 7 partner airlines." "Thank you, Patricia," Raymond replied, "and Marcus's speaking position." "Right after your introduction as planned," she confirmed, then added with a sincere look toward Marcus, "You're going to be amazing." As the family made their way to the staging area, Marcus felt a curious sense of completion. The woman who had once torn up his boarding pass was now helping prepare him for his first public speaking role. The incident that had caused such pain had ultimately created opportunities for positive change far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Minutes later, Raymond Johnson stood at the podium, addressing the gathered crowd with the quiet authority that had become his trademark. 3 years ago, an incident occurred that forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about our airline and our industry, he began. 2 young passengers were treated with suspicion and disrespect because they didn't fit someone's image of who belongs in first class. Those young passengers were my sons. He paused, letting the words register with those who might not know the story. What could have ended with terminations and public apologies instead became the catalyst for the case initiative, and eventually the Aviation Service Equity Coalition. Today, we take another step forward with the Captain William Thorndike Scholarship and Internship Program, designed to create pathways into aviation for young people from communities historically underrepresented in our industry. Raymond gestured toward Marcus, who approached the podium with measured steps. "And to introduce this program, I'm proud to present our first youth ambassador, someone who experienced firsthand why this work matters. My son, Marcus Johnson." As Marcus took his position at the podium, he surveyed the room filled with journalists, airline executives, and education partners. He took a deep breath, remembering his father's advice to speak from the heart. "When I was 16 years old, I learned a painful lesson about how the world sometimes sees young black men," he began, his voice steady. "But I also learned something more important, that one moment of prejudice doesn't define the story. What matters is what happens next." As he continued his speech, outlining the scholarship program and his role in mentoring its first recipients, Marcus felt a profound sense of purpose. The torn boarding passes that had once symbolized exclusion had become the foundation for inclusion. The pain of that day had been transformed into opportunity for countless young people who would never have to feel they didn't belong. When he concluded to enthusiastic applause, Marcus rejoined his family at the side of the stage. Devon bumped his shoulder approvingly. Catherine squeezed his hand with maternal pride. And Raymond, who had built an airline from nothing but determination and vision, looked at his son with a quiet recognition that the legacy he had created would continue to grow in ways he could never have imagined. Later that evening, as the Johnson family celebrated privately in their home, a letter arrived from one of Captain Thorndike's grandchildren, sharing how proud the late pilot would have been of the scholarship bearing his name. Enclosed was a faded photograph from 1988, a young Raymond Johnson standing proudly beside Captain Thorndike in the cockpit of a Transcontinental Airways aircraft, both men smiling with the shared knowledge that they were breaking barriers together. "Full circle," Raymond murmured, showing the photo to his sons. "From that cockpit to this scholarship, every step matters." "Even the painful ones?" Devon asked, thinking of that day at O'Hare. "Especially those," his father confirmed. "They're often the ones that push us to create the most meaningful change." Marcus studied the old photograph, his father, young and determined, standing alongside the mentor who had believed in him when few others did. Then he looked at his father now, the successful CEO who had transformed an industry while never forgetting where he came from. "Dad," Marcus said thoughtfully, "remember when you told us that Air Elite wasn't just about planes and schedules, but about promises?" Raymond nodded. "Captain Thorndike taught me that long before Air Elite existed." "I think I finally understand what you meant," Marcus continued. "The real promise isn't just getting people from one place to another. It's about creating spaces where everyone belongs, where everyone is treated with dignity. That's the airline you built. Raymond looked at his son with quiet pride, recognizing that Marcus had grasped something essential, not just about the business, but about life itself. "That's the world I'm trying to build," he corrected gently. "The airline is just where we started." As the evening continued, the conversation flowed naturally between past and future, between challenges overcome and opportunities ahead. The incident that had once seemed so devastating had become just one chapter in a much larger story. A story about transformation, about seeing beyond assumptions, about building something better than what came before. And in homes across the country, viewers who had watched the press conference coverage or read about the new scholarship program absorbed their own versions of the lesson. That sometimes, the most powerful change begins with a moment of injustice transformed by the courage to demand better. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment sharing what resonated with you most. Your support helps us continue creating content that matters. Until next time, remember that our most painful moments often contain the seeds of our greatest purpose.